Whether your beer is in a bottle, can, or glass, kick back and relax. It's Better on Draft.
Hello and welcome to episode 359 of Better on Draft. I just had to find how to hide that banner. Again, welcome to episode 359, Better on Draft. This is our first episode after Ken has retired from the podcast. But I am here with Wendy and with our guest. Wendy, what are you drinking today?
Well, in honor of our guest, I went to my cellar and pulled out an El Gordo bourbon barrel-aged imperial stout by Good People Brewing Company out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Very, very nice.
I have a Fat Squirrel from New Glarus that I brought back.
Doesn't get better than that.
Man, that's my favorite by them.
It's such a good beer. And then we have our guest today, Joel Geier, who is the recent author of Flights Across America. Joel, could you tell us about yourself and what you're drinking?
Yeah, for sure. So on social media, you will find me under the moniker of Brewery Travels. Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, all that kind of good stuff. I've been covering my travels to breweries now since, I guess, 2016. I have been to closing in on 1,400 breweries across all 50 states. And as you mentioned, I recently had a book published, as in it came out less than a month ago, Flights Across America, A Brewery Lover's Journey, which kind of chronicles my adventures and experiences at breweries all over the country. It's kind of the way I've been describing it is it's, part travel guide, part how-to guide, and part memoir. I cover, besides describing my process and and planning and all that kind of good stuff, the main chunk of the book is what I call city breakdowns, where I'm breaking down my experiences visiting the breweries in just about every city around the country, talking about the breweries there, sewing together little tidbits of information to try to create a little tapestry of what that craft beer scene is like. I really only discuss the breweries that I have personally visited, although occasionally I'll throw a couple names in there. But it's kind of my ode to my love of breweries. And I guess I should clarify the reason I was able to do this. My wife previously worked as a travel nurse. And then for the last 3 years almost, she's worked fully remote as a nurse practitioner, a psychiatric nurse practitioner. So that's how we lived in 14 states before our 9th wedding anniversary. We always had our home here in Milwaukee, but we would go around and live all over the place, including with our 2 kids. My daughter's 6 and my son is going to be 4 here in a few months. And he spent the first almost 3 years of his life on the road, essentially, just about. So yeah, that's how we kind of got to this spot. And now that, I got kids starting school, we've kind of settled in a little bit more, which felt like a good opportunity to have the book come out and be published. And I'm just really excited to get to come on here and talk with you guys about not just my book, but just about craft beer and brews in general, since it's something that, I can yap about for a pretty long time.
Well, that's perfect.
And then I'm drinking. I'm from Milwaukee. I'm drinking from Milwaukee here, Eagle Park Brewing Company, one of the bigger, well-known breweries here in the city. They have a Belgian white ale called Blues Breaker. A little bit of a, lighter option. I typically actually drink a lot of lagers when I'm at home, but saw this one and, felt, it's a good brewery and something that I hadn't had in a really long time. So picked it up, and that's how we got here.
Nice. So I will get us started and ask, what caused you to write, what turned your passion from, a passion into a book? And how did that process get going?
Yeah. So I had the idea initially for the book when we were traveling. So we traveled in 2 different stints. We did it for a year post kids. So in 2017 and 2018, and then again, starting in 2021 up until kind of the end of last year. And I just kind of hesitated. I guess my wife is a very avid reader. I was always a really avid reader growing up. So books are something that I've always been around and enjoyed. So I kind of just had the idea of, it'd be cool to write a book. And during that first travel stint, though, I started trying to put something together. But at that point, I had been to I think, 300-ish breweries or so. And I kind of realized after writing a bit, I was like, I don't have enough here. Like there's just not nearly enough here to really flesh this out into a true book in terms of what I would want it to be. So, that kind of got shelved. And then when we started traveling again, and it got to the point where I realized, okay, in the next probably, 3 to 6 months, I'm going to get to 1,000. I'm going to hit my 1,000th brewery. And at that point, it kind of came back around again. Like, okay, like once I hit 1,000 breweries, I feel like, at that point, I may have enough for, to start doing a book. So I kind of started to think about that. At that juncture, I hadn't really thought I was going to get to all 50 states. I think at that point, I was at 46, 47 maybe. But we made it happen in the last year. We did Hawaii and Alaska back in 2024. And that completed the circuit, I guess you could say. But yeah, so the book, though, was essentially a way for me to kind of put all this information that I've accrued into one physical thing. So I've taken handwritten notes at every single brewery since number 56. I've posted every single one of my brewery visits on Twitter, and I started my Instagram account when I was at brewery like 200 something. So basically all of them. And I've shared them in that manner, but if someone, to share it in a more comprehensive manner, like Instagram, it's not easy. Like if someone wants to go and look at all the breweries I've been to in a certain city, that's not functionable on Instagram. And it's not really on Twitter anymore. I've been trying to use Twitter, and it seems like a lot of my old tweets about breweries are gone as I've been searching, trying to find some of them. So this is just something that, I love when people message me and ask for recommendations. And I hope they still do that. But this book is kind of also one way to get my take on some of the breweries and the beer scenes around the country, while also providing additional information, kind of talking about the questions that I like to ask when I'm visiting a brewery, things I'm looking for when I visit a brewery, how I plan, beer occasions, and how I plan my brewery visits. I also include all my award winners, to kind of showcase some of the best, some of my personal favorites. And I also have I think 70 pages of color photos at the end of the book of a lot of flight boards and tap rooms. And so if you're a more visual person, there's something there for you too. But yeah, it was also in a way, besides wanting to put all of these experiences into a physical, like one thing. I also just, this was a way also, as I mentioned, we're now home more permanently. I'm going to be still traveling and going to new breweries when I can, but it's not going to be near the same clip of what it has been in the past leading up to this point where we were living on the road, always in new places. And so this kind of puts a bow on that chapter of my life in a way. And maybe in a few years, I'll have, done enough travel since then to produce an updated version, update, the closures and all the new ones and the new places I've been to. But at this juncture, I felt it was a very complete piece and one that I'm very happy with. So yeah, I think that's kind of how we got here. It's just combining a passion with breweries with wanting to share it with people, and I felt that this book was a good way to do that.
Yeah, so maybe now you'll still get the messages asking for recommendations, things to do, but maybe you'll also get messages with updates on cities.
Yes, yes.
Well,
I always tell people that if I can't provide a personal recommendation, I probably know someone that can, because at this point, after living ever, like I have plenty of people that can help if I'm not able to too.
Yeah, nice. I have to also point out that Ken's not here. He is very anti-flight.
He may get triggered by the pictures in my book then.
Yeah, I'll have to. I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention that.
I've had the flight actually on on a couple of the other podcasts I've done since the book. We've had the flight discussion, in terms of the pros and cons of it, because there definitely are, and I talk about that in the book actually too, like the different pour styles and what they each offer and what is good and what is not as good about doing each one if you're traveling for beer.
Yeah, and there's the etiquette part of it too. If the brewery is slammed, maybe.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I prefer to visit a brewery when it's dead, honestly, but that's not always possible. But
right.
And it's also not better for the brewery if they're not busy. So it's kind of a you don't want to wish that a brewery isn't busy. So
right.
Yes, you just know that certain times of day.
Yes,
you're going to be lucky. And then I have to ask before I hand it over to Wendy. Did you collect souvenirs from each of these breweries? And where
Not
do you store
each
them?
of them, not each of them, but when I do, so I do grab, I do a coaster, get a sticker, when I can. And so I have these monstrous scrapbooks, essentially. I think I've got like 7 of them now that are full of coasters from like breweries all over the country that I've been to. And then I cover the outside of them in the stickers. And then I obviously have way too much brewery merchandise in terms of clothing. Primarily t-shirts, but also recently a lot of sweatshirts and hats as well have started to come more and more into the collection. More than I can really reasonably wear. That is for certain, especially when it comes to the shirts. But what can you do? You keep going to them, and eventually, even if you're only occasionally snagging them, it still adds up very quickly.
Yep. All right.
Yeah, I found that I have to be very cautious about what types of souvenirs that I buy, because I have boxes of glasses that I have nowhere to display. So they're just in a box right now.
Yeah, I when I was first doing it, before I actually was like quote unquote brewery travels, and like the first like 10 to 20 breweries, I bought glasses at a lot of them when we first lived in Oregon. And then I quickly realized soon on, I was like, oh, like I have a lot of glasses, like I don't really have anywhere to put them. So yeah, that became a rare. I've been gifted glasses at breweries since then that I still have. But I've bought in glassware from a couple like true like glass blowing companies that make, fun beer glasses. But yeah, otherwise that's one of those things. In some places, you'll get a glass on like the tour too. Like, I know the lakefront here, you get a pint glass with every tour you go on. And it's like, okay, well, I know some people that basically have an entire cupboard just of like the lakefront pint glasses.
I thought they
So
gave out wood and nickels. I don't remember if I got a pint glass from them, but I definitely did their tour.
yeah, well, I think they actually did make a switch from that at one point.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
I think now, yeah, but yes, they do still like, it's a lot of those places is also I've been to some before where they do like the little pour. Like I remember at Stone, they had a smaller glass that they gave you and that you got to keep. I'm trying to think what other ones have had that, but yeah, that is something that the glassware is something that, you can't just fold and throw into your closet either, like a t-shirt. So
Right.
At least the growlers aren't a thing as much anymore.
oh yeah,
That was bad.
Yeah.
I probably had 40 growlers at one point when my roommate was like, "Can we talk about this?"
That is a collection right there. That is an impressive collection.
So, did we mention how long it took you to do all 50 states and 1,400 breweries?
Yeah, well, so I visited my first brewery, would have been, I think it was either January or February of 2015. It was my right before I graduated from college. I would have been, so I would have been 22 or whatever, I think. Yeah. Small brewery in Iowa called Single Speed in Cedar Falls. And then my wife and I got married, moved to Oregon, right out of college. And I visited a handful there, maybe a little less than 20. And then once we moved to Milwaukee, it would have been in mid 2016. I started visiting some more. And at that point, I was kind of like, oh, hey, this is kind of cool. Like I should start keeping track of it. And that quickly went from a list to a spreadsheet. And I started my Twitter account. I was probably around 30 or 40 visits at that point. And it was in early 2017 when she was working a nursing job here locally, and she had some travel nurses that came and worked for her. And she was like, oh, hey, like that's actually kind of cool. And we were both in grad school, but we both decided, hey, like that might be a neat thing. And so it was the summer of 2017. I had been to like 80 some. So I was still under 100 breweries at that point, in mid 2017. And that next year, I got up to, I think I was close to 4. I hit my 400th after we had returned home because we were expecting our first child. And then obviously in the next year, I still was visiting some. I think I got over 500. And then, COVID obviously hit and that kind of halted things. I hit my 600th it would have been May, because we were doing a big road trip after my son was born in 2021. So it would have been May 2021. I hit number 600. So you figure between May of 2021 until now, I basically more than doubled what I had done with all the traveling. And I had done, like I said, I had done quite a bit also during the first stint of traveling, but from that May of 2021 up until, probably through 2023 for sure, because this last year I was a little bit slower. I would say 2021, 2022, and 2023 were my biggest years, I would say, for the brewery stuff in terms of visiting. But yeah, so it technically spread out over, I guess, almost a decade at this point, but it was mostly done in 4 years between the different travel kind of stints, a majority of it at least.
So you talk in the book about the difference between beercation and finding beer while you're on vacation.
Yeah.
How do you, and I know you have some statistics at the back of the book too, and I don't think I saw this one in there. How many do you think were breweries that you hit because of beercations as opposed to we're just in the area, let's hit this brewery?
Well, I can tell you, so in terms of planning a true vacation that includes true travel, an airplane where I am going to a place strictly for beer, it has only been one time. And that was to Austin, Texas with my dad in 2021. We went for 3 nights. We had 2 full days and 2 half days on the ends, and we visited 27 breweries and had an absolute blast.
Nice.
But I have also made many kind of side trips that were within, an hour and a half of where we were by myself, kind of going off and finding different breweries. So in terms of planning a multi-day trip on just based around beer, it's just that one. But I have also, I know it sounds silly to say I've worked hard at this, but I truly have. I have spent a lot of time, a lot of planning, a lot of energy, scouting and finding out where we're going and knowing what breweries are, along the way. Cause we obviously, we would stop for lunch in the middle of a road trip. My 600th brewery, my milestone visit was, I found a brewery along our road trip, and we stopped in North Platte, Nebraska at Pal's Brewing Company. We actually made specific detours when we were living, kind of in the Southeast on the way home, once on the way down so that I could hit Arkansas because I had not been to a brewery there yet. And then we made a full detour, added a full day to our trip home so that I could spend a night, and we could spend a night in West Virginia, and I could go to breweries there. So that's kind of a gray area. I feel like, because we were doing more than just that. We were not going, I guess, in the West Virginia and Arkansas instance, we really were going because of the beer, though. We did other things, but we wouldn't have gone there if it wasn't for me and my brewery stuff, and wanting to get to all 50 states. So I guess those are kind of gray, but obviously most of them are me finding breweries while we are places. But I will also say that I had the cheat code, like I said, of going and living places for months at a time. We went and lived, like I said, in 14 different states, mostly in major cities. We lived in Denver, Seattle, San Diego, New Orleans, Baltimore, Asheville. We lived on the coast of Florida, Nashville. We lived up on the coast in New Hampshire. We lived all over the place, and we would be there for months at a time. And so that enabled me to not only dive into the beer scene local to that area, but it also enabled me to do these weekend trips with my family. In Baltimore, we went to Philly and Washington, D.C. and Richmond, Virginia and Harrisburg and the Delaware Shore. We went to these places for a weekend. So it wasn't really a full, big trip, but for most people it would have been. So in that manner, we just had kind of a different setup with how we were, traveling, that made it so that I was able to do this. But yeah, so for me personally, I've really only gone on one true beercation. I'm hoping I may actually be going on one again soon. We'll see, because we have some United airline vouchers because they messed up our flights and lost my children's car seats on our last flight. Which, believe it or not, that's kind of the car seats are kind of, I'd rather you lose my clothes.
Tough one. Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah, no, it's a great question. But that's also why I really stress in the book that beercations are going to be few and far between, at least for most people. It's about being able to find ways to visit breweries just whenever you're out somewhere. And even if you're local, I mean, most people haven't visited all the breweries in their own area, especially if you're in a metro area. You know, I'm sure, you know, how many people, I'm sure there are a lot of people that have been to all of them in Detroit, in like the Detroit metro area, but there's also probably way more that haven't. So that's a big part of my book is it's a book that I hope the most steadfast, you know, nerdy beer geek that has traveled lots of breweries will thoroughly enjoy, but it's also a book that a more novice craft beer person can pick up, and it can hopefully inspire them to kind of take that next step into traveling for beer.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because what I found, so I read the book through the electronic version, but I just put it in my cart to buy the hardcover version so that
let's talk afterwards. I can send you a signed copy, and because even if I have to pay for shipping, it's still fine because Amazon, you know, Jeff Bezos cuts into my, you know, into my money. So let's talk afterwards.
Well, I'm glad I haven't actually purchased it yet, but yeah. I want a hard copy so that I can put my own notes in there, and
I love
get my highlighters and Post-its ready. Because when I was reading through the book, I really enjoyed reading about the places that I have been to, because it brought back all of those memories. Yeah. And then I also added like 20 more breweries to my bucket list that I'm like, oh, I forgot I want to try that one. And I just added it to the bucket list. So I do think that you hit that nail on the head of being able to talk to both the craft beer novice and the most well-traveled beer traveler.
Well, that made me smile. That absolutely just made my day, hearing you say, you know, getting the thing, but then wanting, like, taking your own notes and the sticky notes. I think that is absolutely wonderful. And that's one of the things that I think is great about it, is that it is supposed to be, it is my, you know, kind of my memoir, and I want people to relate to it, but I also want them to then go out and experience it for themselves. And yet I think what you just said too is another reason why you said, why a book? Obviously, anytime I pick it up and flip through it, you know, it can be the same thing, but going back and writing it, and because each you know, all the different city sections I wrote, you know, individually kind of thing. And each time you were going back and going through my old notes and looking at my old posts and putting it all together, that whole time is just me getting to reminisce about all these experiences at these breweries that I've had. And that was a lot of fun. I mean, at times, obviously, writing a book is not 100% fun. I can promise you that. Although writing it wasn't, even though, like, figuring out the publishing situation was definitely the worst part. But it was a very fun process for me too, to kind of go back through and kind of come to grips with the magnitude of, like, where I've all been, like what I have all gotten to experience. And it was a good reminder to really think back on all those different experiences kind of almost individually in a way, rather than just lumping it into a big number, essentially.
So on our show in the past, we have all talked about a brewery that was difficult to get to, that we weren't sure if we were going to get there or if we were even going to be able to find it. Do you have a memory like that?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely some of the more remote ones. I'm trying to think the furthest I've ever driven for a brewery, like where I'm just driving to a brewery. It's at least an hour and a half, if not an hour, 40 minutes one way. But I mean, I can also think about times, for instance, there's this small brewery in Napa, California, that I have grandparents that live there. And I tried to visit it on 3 different instances. And one time the first time was my fault, where I had the hours incorrect. The second time we were going to go, and then I had to, like, change my plans last minute because of family things. And the third time I showed up and they were closed for some private event. And I don't get out there all that often, you know. And so this became my white whale. It was just like it was this place called Downtown Joe's. It's like this small, it's not even like a major brewery or anything. It's just like, you know, there's not that many breweries in Napa. So after you go to someone, it's like, okay, you know, what am I going to go to here? Well, you know, I still have this one. And then on by golly, was it the third time the charm? In this case, the fourth time was the charm. I did finally get to it and drink the beer. But that is one instance where it was like, holy buckets, how are they making me work for this? But yeah,
But now
I'm
it's got
trying to
that whole
think.
story.
Yeah. And although I would say some of my more remote breweries aren't the ones that were the hardest for me to get to, because I've been to some in like rural parts of Iowa and rural parts of Wisconsin that for most people would be really like why are you there? But it's because I have family in those places, like that's the other kind of part of it. But yeah, I'm trying to think off the top of my head what the furthest would have been or like the most remote. And I'm sure that there is an answer to this question, and I am just blanking on it right now. Because some of the most remote ones aren't the ones that were hardest for me to get to because we were in those areas already. Like some of the ones up by Acadia National Park in Maine that are like way off the beaten track. One called Strong Brewing on like this dinky, tiny little like peninsula in Maine that was off on its own. Yeah, I'll think about that. And if I think about it while we're still talking, I'll make sure to bring it up again. That's a good question though.
Sounds good. So I'm a drink beer from here fan.
Mm-hmm.
So I really love the theme drink local everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have merch? Because I would totally buy that.
I do. I think I do. I did, and I believe that's still up. Let me double check. Yeah, I definitely still do. I can send you that link too, because at one point I had it linked on my website, but now obviously that is reserved for the book because that's all I'm posting about. But yes, I can get you something because yeah, I did do the drink local everywhere type of merch and everything. So
I just love that moniker.
I know. Yeah, well, because that was kind of my whole thing was that I always try to drink local because whenever I'm living all over the place, like I'm from Wisconsin, but I'm not just going to look at like I drink local everywhere. And I've made a lot of great connections doing that. And that can also mean that if you're not traveling though, just drink local everywhere. That just means if you're out and about, just drink local, drink your local craft brewery. If you're at the bar, drink your local craft brewery. If you're, at home, just, support those local businesses that are making products that you like. And, that's just, I mean, as we were talking about beforehand, we're seeing, right now the craft beer market is not, I don't think we're going to see a big decline, but we're certainly seeing a leveling off. And if you love a brewery, you better support them because not all of them are going to be around forever. We've seen some that this year locally, a couple that I really love that have closed. So that's where we're at right now.
Talking about local and hard to get to, New Glarus is a tricky one to visit because
That
they're not
is
open on weekends.
That's true. Now, because that could be considered one of the more remote ones, also because it's kind of closest to Madison, I suppose. But if you're not in Madison or like Rockford, Illinois, like it's not really close to any other cities because it's probably like little over 2 hours from Milwaukee. So yeah, and they're going to be shutting down more often now because if you saw their big announcement, their $500 million expansion that's going to include a distillery. I mean, you want to talk about what's going to be a magnificent experience for people once they completely rejuvenate their visitor experience. Oh boy,
it was already a nice visitor experience to begin with, except not open weekends. But it sounds like after this is done, they'll be open weekends.
Yeah, well, and they're going to hopefully have like a more traditional like tap room too, also is my understanding, which because right now they don't have that, so that would be something that would be a good addition, I feel like.
So I really enjoyed the questions to ask section of the book, and I was just curious if that was something that came about naturally or if it was something you thought about before you started visiting breweries.
Yeah, no, this was something that definitely came along as I went along, and I think I referenced it in the book. If you read the book, I reference it that one of the questions that I now ask all the time, that I did not obviously always ask was, what are your flagships? Like, what are you best known for? Like, if I'm at a busy brewery and I'm only probably going to get in like one question, that's going to be the question I ask. And that all stems back from a visit in Dallas to Petticolas Brewing Company. This would have been early. This was before I even hit 200 breweries. So this would have been, early on. And I was filling out my flight card and I had 3 and I couldn't really decide on a 4th one. I said, hey, like, what should I get on the 4th one? I said, oh, you should get, what our flagship is the Velvet Hammer. It's an Imperial Red Ale. It's in Cloxton. I think it's over 8%. Like it's a beer that I would not have otherwise probably put on my flight. It's not a style especially at that point, early on in my travels that I would have ordered. And that was my favorite beer in Dallas, Texas. Very, very good. It's won a whole bunch of awards. And that experience is what really led me to asking this question, because not every brewery is going to be, best known for their lager or their IPA. Sometimes they're going to be, they're going to have Belgians that they're, best, that they're most proud of, or, because it's different. If you go to a brewery and they specialize in sours and all they have are sours, or all they have are IPAs, that's obvious. But there are places that have that same wide variety, but they're like Peticolas, and they have something like an Imperial Red Ale as their flagship beer. And if you don't know that going in, you may miss out on the best beer there. So a lot of the other questions kind of just came as I became more knowledgeable as well, kind of figuring out what kind of questions to ask, and also became, I guess, more confident also, because I didn't early on. I was just like, I was just, and I still am, just some guy at the bar. And it was actually became easier for me, not because I got more confident initially, but because I was taking notes at the bar. And that's not something anyone else is really doing at the bar. And so, especially when I was visiting and it wasn't super busy, that's going to draw the attention of other people, both patrons and workers. If there's a guy here taking notes at the bar, they're going to be like, oh, are you like writing an article? Are you doing research? Blah, blah, blah. And then I'll kind of just explain, no, I'm just some, schmuck that likes visiting breweries and then telling people about what I drank. Although now I can say I'm a schmuck that published a book. So,
Exactly.
there is
It's all in the
that.
book now.
But that is what initially early on in my travels would really spur on the conversations. And during those conversations is where I kind of got the type of information where I learned what kind of questions would get the best information for what I was looking for. Because I do want to learn about the beer. Like, I want to know what they're best known for. I want to know what some of the personal favorites are for both patrons and for workers. But then I also want to learn about the full brewery and the brewery experience and the history of the brewery. I'm sure if you look at the book, obviously one of the things that I love is when I visit a brewery and it's in a building that has history to it, that was other things, especially, buildings that maybe date back to the 19th century or even, further. So that's something that I became really passionate about. And the longer I went, kind of the more questions I would kind of learn to be able to ask. And again, you're kind of also depending on the setting and the situation, you kind of know, okay, I'm only going to get one or two questions in here, so I kind of got to pick which ones I want to know the most of. And then, like I said in the book too, a lot of the questions can be geared though towards patrons that you're sitting next to at the bar. You may be sitting next to someone and you may be like, hey, like, and if they're local and they're talking to you, they can be a great source of information too. Be like, hey, what other breweries in the area do you like? Because it's happened to me a couple times where I've changed my plans midnight, because obviously I'm a very meticulous and planning person. I have my night planned out to a T when I leave, whether it's the house or the hotel room. But if I'm talking to somebody and they're like, hey, well, do you like lagers? Like, you really need to go to this place. If you miss this one, like, you really should go here. And it doesn't happen all that often, but it has happened where I've changed because I ask questions. So I do think that's a really important quality for people if they are interested in learning about the brewery itself and the brewery scene, is to just ask questions, because there's a lot of knowledgeable people out there at breweries. And that's the best way to go about it, in my opinion.
You've got two historic ones. Sorry, Wendy. You've got two historic ones there in Wisconsin. You got the Minhas Brewery,
yep,
and then the sadly closing Leinenkugel's Brewery.
Well, and Point Brewery also in Stevens Point. They're
yes,
they're like the second oldest, I think, in the country. So yeah, but no, the Leine's, they're still brewing beer, mind you.
I thought I saw they brewed their last batch, but maybe
they brewed their last batch in Chippewa Falls.
Okay.
So they are still brewing beer, but not. Which, I mean, the Chippewa Falls has been around for a century and a half, so it's just like real kick to the shin of that whole community, unfortunately. But no, they are still brewing here at the Miller campus. They're just downsizing, and they still have the pilot brew pub inside the baseball stadium as well. But it is not what it obviously was in terms of the Leinenkugel's brand.
It was a beautiful campus to visit out there.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Wendy, go ahead.
Oh, that's all right. So I was just going to say, I too have come across situations where I'm out on have plans to go to other breweries, and somebody at the bar will suggest another place. Actually, one of them that was suggested is a brewery that I would told people in Michigan for a good 5 or 6 years. If you're on the west side of the state, you have to go there.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that was a pretty good find. Can you think of an example of a brewery that you went to because somebody suggested it that you weren't planning on going to?
Yeah, well, I mean, one instance for me was when we were living in Denver and we were going down to Colorado Springs for a weekend, and I had posted about it and I had tagged some of the breweries I was thinking about going to, and someone that I knew that lived there at that point, they've since moved, that lived there at that point, said, "Hey, like, there's a brewery that just opened like a week ago, and they're already making really good beer, and like you need to go check them out." And I did, and they were making good beer, and I'm really glad that I included them in my visit, because again, if I'd been like if they had been open less than a week, they weren't necessarily popping up on a lot of lists, and even on Google Maps, hardly. They weren't some of the first ones that came up. So that's the other thing, as I say, is I don't do it as much as I used to, but social media can be a great tool too if you're looking for information. You're like, hey, I'm going to Chicago, or I'm going to St. Louis or Miami for the weekend, and if you tag some accounts or whatever, like, hey, like, what places should I be checking out? And, a lot of people will be able to tell you that. And if they don't, then message me and I'll send out the question, and I'll be able to ask people about it. So, it's a very, fun thing to be able to use the craft beer community in that way to get, because everybody obviously has different palates. Like, not everyone's going to like the same brewery, but still you can still get this kind of information and then use it to the best of your ability to get to places that you will enjoy. And there's still going to be stinkers. There's still going to be stinkers.
That's the way it goes. City.
Yes, I mean, like I said, I told you guys, I have a whole tiered list for Milwaukee breweries, and I am diligent, and I am all about taking people to breweries around here. Like I said, I've traveled and I have loved living in different places, but I will still always be very proud to show people around my personal home city. And I know that that's how it is for everybody in their respective cities, which I think is amazing. And I think that's why craft beer has become so great, is because everybody is proud of the beer that their breweries are producing.
Yeah. So a little about me. I travel for work, and lately it's been international travel more than domestic travel. It used to be domestic more than international. So I'm just kind of, has this part of writing the book, have you now kind of thought maybe it's international time or anything? Or
yeah, so I have. So it was when I was younger, but I have done some international travel. I've been to Australia, I've been to Brazil and Central America and different parts of the Caribbean and Canada, but we do have our sights set on Europe. Right now, it's probably going to be a little while. We would like, so our kids are 6 and 3, and obviously they are very well traveled. They're almost 50 staters at this point. But before we drop a ton of money going to Europe and a ton of time and effort, we'd like them to be a little bit older. But that is definitely coming. There is obviously a ton of places in Europe that I want to get to. And really just about everywhere. I mean, that's got to be my next goal. After all 50 states, I got to drink a beer in at least every continent, right? I guess Antarctica, I don't know that they have brewing any beer in Antarctica, but the other 6 are doable. So, that one may take a little more time and money. So, I feel like that'll take a little more effort, but yeah, that is definitely going to be down the road at some point, the international. Although don't expect me to be able to write books about all those places, because I'm not going to be able to go and live there for years to where I can have the experience to do that. But I will certainly go and enjoy it to the fullest that I can.
Yeah. I'm only missing Australia, and I have plans.
Ooh, wow, good for you. That is impressive right there.
I mean, and Antarctica, but
well,
they don't
that's
there.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, that hardly counts. So
right.
what have been not to turn the interview around on you, but what have been some of your other favorite countries that you've been to for beer?
Favorite brewery internationally that I've gone to was in Bangkok, a place called Chit Beer. And it's absolutely wonderful. It's on this island. You have to take a water taxi to it. I can't remember what time it closed because I had been drinking a lot, because I was there were 2 Americans there, and, and the owner kind of paired us up so that we had someone to talk to. But yeah, the 2 of us drank a lot. And then they put us on the boat to get off the island when the place closed down. But it was, that one is an interesting brewery. at least when I was there, I don't know that it's still the same. It's been a few years, but
Yeah.
they have a brewing college basically that they run out of
Okay.
there. And so all night long, they were ringing a bell because we kicked a keg, and the next home brewer essentially would stand up and talk about the beer that he brewed, and then they'd put it on tap.
That's
And
really interesting.
everyone would get a pint of it, and just the whole night just kept going by like that. I mean,
That's
I don't know how many.
crazy.
I don't
That's
know
a
how many
really
kegs we
unique.
tapped.
That's really, really unique. That's awesome.
It was cool, and it's this island that you took a water taxi out, so there's no cars. It's just a
Yeah.
bunch of vendors and a couple watts out there. So there's
Yeah.
it's a really neat locale. It's a really neat experience.
Yeah.
So that was kind of one of my favorites. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. I can see why. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I strongly recommend it to everybody who goes there. The head brewer is a guy named Porn, and the beer that I brought back and flew home with is Porn's Milk Stout.
Oh, well, keep the label from that one, I suppose,
Yeah, I don't think I did, but I do have the untapped check-in, so
Yeah.
that's something.
Basically the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And much
Yeah,
easier to keep track of
Yes.
or have to
Yeah,
store.
that is a question. Do you untapped these beers?
No.
Okay.
I don't need to get into the full thing. I have my qualms with Untapped. As a whole, as how I think it can be a fine tool. I talk about it in the book. But I also think that it's a tool that is not used properly in the industry overall. But like I said, I technically have an account. I just don't use it. But I know that a lot of breweries use it to have post like their tap list. So that's why I have one, so that I can easily access it. But like I said, I've taken handwritten notes and I keep spreadsheets. So I may be in my early 30s, but I am very old school in that manner. So I have stacks of notepads because I've used the same leather portfolio with my sticker on it since brewery number 56. And I just have replaced the notepad in it. I don't know how many times at this point, a lot. And so I just have huge stacks of notepads downstairs in my basement with all my notes. And like I said, then I transfer some of them, not all the notes, but like the important stuff into a spreadsheet that's done. I have a page for each state, and that's how I keep track of all of it. And obviously, and I do post all of it on, like I said, on Instagram and Twitter as well. So that was another method of tracking it, I guess you could say. But long run, it would have probably been fun to keep it untapped, because it would have been cool to see some of the stats from the different things and, how many of each different styles and blah, blah, blah. But that just didn't happen at this point. I'm not really going to start doing it. So.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And we're kind of, I don't know, Untapped is a topic that comes up on the show a fair amount.
Yeah.
I don't think we have a strong pro or against Untapped.
Yeah.
It feels like it kind of fits in with the way social media is going at this point, where it's, some people really want to have their opinions on there. Some people.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the struggle, is that I've seen someone say that they should do it like, I forget what the movie website is, Rotten Tomatoes, where you have like an audience score and then you have a critic score, because that's one of the issues with it, is that you have everyone and their dog just throwing an opinion, and you have some of the best beers in the country that have like a 3.5 rating. And you have hype styles like imperial stouts and super double dry hopped hazy IPAs and fruited sours that tend to score on average much, much higher than really well done amber ales or Kolsch. And to me, that's basically backwards, but also like it just doesn't show a fair representation of the actual craft beer community in a way, although it may show kind of almost what's most popular, I suppose. But it's also like the people that are using those apps also may be different than, like, because a lot of people like me and like brewers, like they don't want to use it because, their favorite beers, they're not going to worry about posting it on Untapped. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it definitely can be a tool, and I think it's one that you can use and cross-reference. But I also said in my book, I don't know if I exactly said it, but you just don't want to take it as it's like the Bible. Like, you don't want to base all of your beer travel based solely off of Untapped. You don't want to look at a brewery's Untapped rating and say, I'm not going there because they're only a 3.8 and this other place is, a 4.06. So I don't even need to bother going to the other one. that is my big critique of it, is that some people, view it as, and I know that there's distributors that base their, some of their distro stuff on tap rankings. And to me, it's just kind of a slippery slope with that. But like I said, overall, like I said, if I know a lot of people that don't actually care about ranking the beers, they just literally check into them for their own personal recollection to know if they've had it or not. And I think that's a really good use of it. I do, like, and I kind of wish I'd had that. It'd be easier than, the note taking, obviously. Maybe someday I'll try to put all my notes into it, but for now, I'm not willing to take on that project quite yet, at least.
Yeah, that sounds like a heavy lift. I don't know that
Yeah.
I want to do that.
Yeah.
I used to say that after one brewery festival.
Yeah.
I'm going to just write down, and then I'll check into it after, like, the next day. It never happens.
Well, and that's my problem too, is that I've only taken notes at the breweries when I visited the first time. So like that doesn't count brewery festivals and beers that I purchased to drink at home and return visits, like yeah, I'm not, I feel like that's a rabbit hole that I don't really want to go down at this point.
Yeah, I play drinking games on one of the Untapped Discord server.
Yeah.
So for example, right now it's Wet January, and so it's beers that are 10% or higher are the only ones that count for points. Yeah. But next month is one of my favorites, and it is February. It's Drinking the Alphabet, where we get all of the beers in alphabetical order. Like we drink a beer that starts with A all the way through.
Interesting. I
Also
imagine X would be, how many beers start with X? I can't imagine.
I usually have a can of Xmas Pickle from Urban Artifact out of Cincinnati. I usually have that on hand, but I don't this year.
Okay, so it's going to be a little bit of an Easter egg hunt then.
Stone has Chocovesa. It's usually out around then too. So yeah, these are solved problems.
Yeah, you'll figure it out.
But there's a beer festival in early February that I have to use Untapped at that, because I get through a significant portion of the alphabet. You're
not looking for specific breweries or specific, styles. You're like, okay, I'm on C. I need to I'm looking.
Exactly. And my friends who go with me, they do some scouting for me too.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that, I think, is a good use of Untapped.
I agree. That's fun.
Yeah. Now, Wendy, did you have more questions? Yes.
Yeah, I've got a million questions. Yeah, I took 6 pages of notes when I read the book.
I love that. I love that. That, like I said, that just makes my day.
So one of the things that I noted was Second Shift in St. Louis. You talked about the fact that they were animal friendly, and that one really held a soft spot in my heart, because not only were they dog friendly, but they had a bird that was there. Mm-hmm. Did you see the bird? I loved it.
And the Kreider, so I know I said in there, the Kreiders, they are also just genuinely amazing people. That's one of the few breweries where I genuinely, like, I had to shout out the people too, because I know them, and I have a good friend who lives in St. Louis that he's very close with them also. So yeah, that's a brewery that truly is one of those, like, they care about the community, they care about the people, and it shows through in the way that they run their business. So that is certainly a brewery that is worthy of any shout out that you can give them.
Absolutely. So I'm just wondering if there's any other breweries like that you visited that kind of held a soft spot for you, that you would.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times it does have to do, I would say, with the people. And I would say some of the ones that kind of hold a soft spot for me are the breweries that kind of treated me like I was like a big deal when I had hardly visited any breweries yet. There is a brewery in Newburyport, Massachusetts, Newburyport, Massachusetts, called Newburyport Brewing. I'd been to 100 some, I'd been to not like hardly over 100 breweries at that point. And the two owners came over and talked to me about, the places that I was going to, and all about their brewery and why they started it. They gave me and my wife free shirts. Like, they were amazing people. And again, I also met another one, and it's sadly an closed brewery called Home Brewing in San Diego, where I'd been to maybe around 300. And the owner and the head brewer brought me back and just talked to me for like half an hour to 45 minutes, and just chatted, and like, were so nice, and giving me pours out of the tank that weren't on and everything. And I've obviously had a lot of those experiences, along the way. a lot of my milestone visits. Dissolver at number 800, their design team made me my own sign. And it's just, again, the people that I met along the way. And I guess the soft spot is almost a lot of the friends I made, around the country, because without craft beer and traveling, I wouldn't have all these close friends that, some of them they started off as friends on social media and then became friends in person after I got to visit them. And others became friends in person first before social media. And so like some of those brewery visits also where I get to go with, a close friend to a brewery for the first time. That's also, special. So yeah, I guess those early on visits where people treated like what I was doing was cool and important, even though at that point, like, I wasn't, I didn't have thousands of followers. I didn't have a book coming out, I didn't have any of that. And they still cared about what I was doing and cared about what I had to say about stuff. So yeah, I guess there's a couple examples in there. But yeah, it's really been throughout the experience. Like, I guess those will be what I end it with. But that's another question that I feel like if I thought about it for a while, there'd be a dozen that would, come up and that I'd want to discuss. So we can move on to the next one.
All right. The last question I have for you is, what local or regional differences did you pick up on? Like different terms for flights or growlers, something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, when it comes to breweries, obviously there's certain styles that are more popular in certain areas. Although in more recent years, I feel like the regionality has been a little bit lost. Because, you used to think about, hazy IPAs or, New England and then West Coast IPAs. You're really only going to find the good ones out on, California and maybe in Oregon. And now you can kind of find good examples of all those styles all over the country. I would say, though, that, I talk about the historic breweries and, in historic buildings, and it may seem silly, but obviously certain parts of the country are going to have a much higher percentage of more unique and cool taproom spaces than others. For instance, on the East Coast and even in the Midwest, there's a lot more historic buildings that have been converted into breweries than for, say, the West Coast. Like in San Diego, like there's some, of course, but a lot of breweries in San Diego are like in business parks, in strip malls like that. There's a lot of breweries that are like that. Whereas, in New England and, the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic, there's a lot in like, oh, this used to be a train station, or this used to be a church, or this used to be a bank. Like there's just a lot more of these historic buildings that date back to the year starts with 18. And obviously there also just aren't as many buildings starting then in the West Coast because it wasn't built up as much at that point.
It's
and
like
then
when you go to Europe and
yeah, exactly. I mean, Europe would be a whole other ball game, obviously, when you do that. I mean, that's a whole other that's not even comparable to a certain extent when you're talking about, just America as a whole. But otherwise, I would say, there are still, I know I just said that the styles, we've lost some of that, but there still are instances where I would say you see a little bit more of the styles in certain areas. For instance, when we were up in Alaska this summer, I saw more barley wines per brewery than, just about anywhere else I think I've been. That's a very popular style up there, which I get, to get through wintertime. I don't think they probably don't serve many beers under 10% in the wintertime in Alaska. But, and then when in a place like Texas, there's good lagers being made everywhere, but a place like Austin, Texas, I was there and they were really cranking out a ton of lagers. I know, Texas, they get so hot in the summer. A lot of places just crank out a bunch of lagers. So there is still some of that for sure. In terms of terminology, flights, I wouldn't say that, and I wouldn't say there's any. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there's like any specific. I would say one thing I've noticed is that you'll occasionally see breweries in different parts of the country try to use language that isn't official. Like I've seen places that that call it a Midwest IPA, or this is a Colorado Pale Ale, or it's like, okay, well, why are you saying that? It's like, unless you're like I did see it used one time because I've seen multiple like Midwest IPAs or whatever. And I did see it once where they were using like all like local ingredients essentially. And like, okay, I get where you're coming from, at least with that. But other times it's just like, oh, it's supposed to be a meshing between a West Coast and kind of a haze. It's like, oh, so you mean kind of like just like a typical IPA, then is what you're saying. So it's not super bitter and it's not super juicy. Okay, that's an American IPA. Like that's what it is. But
in the IPA wars, it was a big distinction.
Oh no, it was a very big distinction back then. I mean the IBU races and all that kind of stuff. Florida Weiss's was one that was an actual also like that's one that they did kind of do like the fruited stuff, and like they do have like a lot of breweries down there. That's what they call it. The kind of the more fruited Berliner Weisses, and they call it the Florida Weiss is very much a style down there. So there still is certainly some regionality, and some of it is kind of made up, but it's still there, I guess, technically. But yeah, and the biggest part to me though is just, the differences are there's still differences because some regions are still just way more brewery focused than others in terms of, if you go to a Portland, Oregon or a Denver, the craft beer scene there is a really big deal versus if you go to places, in West Virginia or Alabama or Arkansas, like there's craft breweries there, and some places are starting to get more of a scene, but it's still not part of that city's like identity the same way that it is in some of those other like more older kind of cities that are, or not older cities, but older craft beer cities. But I would say though, in the last 10 years, you've obviously now seen where we've gotten to the point where essentially every city is making craft beer and essentially every city has good breweries. So the good local beer is out there if you're willing to go and find it.
All right, Joel.
True story.
We are getting towards the end of the hour, and so we're going to start wrapping up.
I'm a long talker. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. No, it's great. We are going to wrap the show like we wrap every show with some final questions. But before we do that, I'm going to remind everyone that you are Joel Geier of the handle Brewery Travels. Where can we find you?
Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky. I'm brewery_travels on Instagram though. Someone already had the Brewery Travels name, and I wasn't going to pay him for it. So that's how we got there.
Yeah, those things happen. And then the name of the book is Flights Across America,
A Brewery Lover's Journey. And you can find that Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I'm pretty sure it's at other places too. You can either
favorite place to buy
it. Wherever it's easiest for the people to buy it from. I don't have a strong preference. If you can buy it from me personally, that's better. But once I have to ship the book, then it's kind of the same profit as what it would be online. So it doesn't really matter that much. But yeah, I'm doing a lot of signings. I have signings around the area here, and those have been a lot of fun. But yeah, I love the book. I love sharing it with people. It's been great to get, feedback from folks, and I hope that people are enjoying it. And yeah, you can, if you're having a hard time, you can Google it. Otherwise, if you follow me on any of the social media platforms, it's either on my profile or it will not take you long to find it because I will be posting about it. So yeah, that's the gist of it, essentially.
All right, I'm going to ask you the final question I've been asking a lot of people lately. What is the last board game or card game you played, and did you win?
I last would have played Candyland with my daughter, and no.
Okay. I'm going to recommend Camel Up. Your kids sound like they're the right age to have a lot of fun with it. You will enjoy it more than you will enjoy Candyland.
Okay. I will have to look into that. Camel Up. Okay.
Yep. I will be happy to send you that information after the show.
Camel board game. There we go. I pulled it up so that way I can look at it afterwards.
It is a camel racing game where you bet on the game and the camels stack on each other and carry each other along the track, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, okay.
All right, and Wendy?
And my final question is, what is a brewery that you have not gotten to that you would really like to go to?
Oh, there's a couple, but there's one name that may surprise some people that I did not get to. And that is Treehouse. I have not been to Treehouse. I'm hoping to get there in the next year or two. We're going to hopefully go because we have not been back to New England since we lived there in 2017. And so the 5 most New England states are the only ones that my kids have not been to yet. And when we were living there in 2017, Treehouse still only had one location. And on their website, they talked about we cannot guarantee because of staffing and release dates that they can pour on site. And so I did not want to drive over an hour out of my way and then not, because my rule, I have to drink beer at the brewery. That's kind of my whole thing. And so like, I was like, at the time, they were still a big deal, you know, back then they were a pretty big deal, but they aren't what they are now, obviously. So that is definitely my one big regret and one that I'm hoping to rectify. Honorable mention to Bellflower in Portland, Maine. I've heard nothing but incredible things out of there. And they were also one that opened up after we lived in that general area. So
They have really amazing beer.
yes.
I really like their tap room too.
Well, I'm like I said, hoping to get there in the next year and a half, 2 years. So
I did not get to the old Treehouse Tap Room, but the new one is beautiful.
well, the one I don't know if I'll get there, but the one out on Cape Cod just looks stunning out on the on the water there. Like that just looks phenomenal. But if we go to Boston, I know there's one kind of closer to Boston now at this point, so that would probably be the one I would end up.
It would be the OG, except the OG is gone. But it's
Yeah.
the replacement of the OG. Yes.
Yeah.
It's the new OG.
It's the new OG. All right. Well, Joel has been wonderful talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Similar to Better on Draft, Joel can be found everywhere. Better on Draft can be found everywhere: Facebook, Twitch, Kick, X. I think we're still on X, Blue Sky, all the places. And we are going to end the show like we end every show. Whatever you think of your beer, we think it's
Better on Draft.
Better on Draft.
Yeah, there we go.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I think he was waiting.